Hi guys, my name is Dodge Landesman, and I'm currently a graduate student for journalism at Emerson College in Boston. I was involved in Democratic Party politics for a while, even ran for local office, lost by about 5%, decided to switch gears, but I've always been interested in Democratic Party politics. And I've always been interested in elections, especially when it comes to choosing the leader of the free world. So what I've wanted to do is essentially follow these different candidates around in New Hampshire. I'm going to get some of that footage and put it on the college news station, but this video is completely separate. This is more about my opinion, and my opinion specifically, I think, when it comes to not just who I like personally, but who is smart strategically, who is a wise choice to choose to run for president. I'm aiming to visit about 2 to 3 candidates a week in New Hampshire. Some weeks I might be able to do more. Some weeks I might be able to do less. If this video gets traction, let me know and I'll continue my visits. Because I think it's important. I think when you have potentially 30 candidates that are running for the Democratic nomination, you have to be extremely careful. And some people say that we're all Democrats and that different sides are judging the opposite side far too harshly. That at the end of the day, they're all progressive enough, and there's certainly an improvement over President Trump. But I disagree with that, because I think you really have to examine the candidates, and you have the luxury to examine their negatives. If you have a year until the first primary, and you're hugely focused on perhaps a woman's right to choose, it is your right to deeply examine everyone's records, because you have 30 candidates to choose from. The same viewpoint of looking and examining at a candidate's record on criminal justice, for example. It would be the same for a candidate to examine, for a voter to examine a candidate's past on LGBT issues, on the industrial military complex, on foreign intervention issues, on the legalization of marijuana. And this isn't the type of year where we're all supposed to coalesce behind one candidate. And that if we hurt the other candidates, then for some reason that nominee is going to be damaged. I don't think that's the point. I think this is a process where you can really whittle down that perfect candidate. Maybe that candidate who is progressive, who is against the establishment, who is also likable, who could be elected, who could play to certain geographical bases, whatever it might be, that perfect animal, that perfect unicorn, in a field of 30 people may actually exist. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to go to New Hampshire and really examine these candidates. Certainly you could see a lot of the sound bites of what they're saying. You could see 30-second clips about the most important issue of the day. But I think it's lacking. I think there's footage that's lacking to really get to the meat of what these candidates are about. I think focusing on these candidates and kind of directly hearing from the horse's mouth, that's important, because there will be a lot of questions for all 30 of these candidates. How authentic are they? What's their current message? Are they trying to identify themselves with the progressive lane, with the Me Too lane, with the moderate lane? Are they trying to play both sides? Are they successfully remorseful of their past votes if they had any conservative votes in the future? Are they talking about it? Are they going full throttle with some of the biggest issues of the day, like marijuana legalization, like criminal justice reform, like the others that I've mentioned? All of that is really, really important. And I'm not going to give you the whole speech of what I record right now. I only won't give you the whole speech because I had a lot of shaky camera, but that's the nice part about this project is I think if you're watching this, you want the meat of what the candidates are talking about. So if there's some mishaps in terms of a faulty camera, please do forgive me. But I really want to put the most amount of footage that I can. So you can see at least 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 minutes of what these candidates are saying. So you can really truly get a truly good idea of what they're about. I think that's important. So I want to talk about my first visit, which was with Kirsten Gillibrand at the University of New Hampshire in Durham. And it was a small meet and greet hosted by the College of Young Democrats. They're a very active group over there. And it was really interesting to see her speech because, of course, getting out of the gate, Gillibrand has had some issues. She's had some conservative votes on immigration. She's had some conservative votes on guns when she was a congresswoman representing a very rural section of the state of New York. Now, I'm from New York City. I wouldn't say that Gillibrand's district was uniquely rural. There was certainly the city of Troy, which is a decent-sized city, which there are urban issues. There are issues of violence. So it's interesting when Gillibrand says, well, she was advocating for constituents. Many rural constituents rely on guns. Well, there's also an issue of gun violence within her district in Troy, within parts of Albany as well. So that's interesting to examine. So yeah, let's just look at some of the big issues and see if she gives us some insight. So she does mention, she does begin to talk about marijuana legalization. So I won't talk too much. I think I'll essentially let the senator speak for herself. But I do want to examine, before we get into it, what issues we'll be looking at and what issues that you'll be more clarified about after you watch her speech, after you kind of hear it directly from the horse's mouth. So she talked comprehensively about a number of issues. Immigration, it seems like she's hook, line, and sinker in being against the wall, in being incredibly progressive. She, again, as I mentioned before, within the state of New York, when she was a congresswoman, she actually voted against giving driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. So there's some issues about that. But she seems like she's as progressive as she can be on the issue. So if you're completely progressive in immigration and you feel like that's a deal breaker, then Gillibrand has seen the light, and I think seeing that light is genuine. She talks about her process a little bit more in her speech, which is an interesting process. I think in terms of marijuana legalization, this is where I start to have some reservations about Gillibrand, because she essentially markets herself as a candidate in the most progressive field. Obviously, she's expressed remorse about her votes. I think a lot of that remorse is genuine. But she seems to be walking a little bit of a tightrope, and I do not know if you can reflexively put her in that hardcore progressive lane. And it's interesting because there are a bunch of moderate candidates. Sean Hickenlooper, who might run, Bloomberg, who might run, and John Delaney, who's a congressman currently running, and they're all kind of unabashedly moderate. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But Gillibrand seems to want to say to the progressives, hey, don't worry, I can get your vote. You can trust me on these issues. But there's some little moments where she sort of hedges her bets, says, well, just in case I'm in a general election, I want to have viewpoints that's palatable. And the first indication of that she'll do that in the future, was her answer on marijuana. She's asked about the legalization of marijuana. That's something I'm personally very supportive of. And what she said is she wanted total decriminalization. And then she kind of spiraled down, sidestepped from it. And she gave an interesting answer because she wanted to attack the criminal justice reform system. And she also said she wanted to completely end cash bail, which is unique and I think is a genuine response to what you can do about fixing the ailing criminal justice system. So I give her points for that. But when the question of full recreational legalization of marijuana was put on the table, she quickly sidestepped it and said, no, just decriminalize. Now, compare that position to Cory Booker. Compare that position to Tulsi Gabbard. Compare it to Kamala Harris, despite some of her past issues. All of those candidates, and Elizabeth Warren as well, and there might be some more that I'm forgetting, please tell me. All those candidates are for 100% full recreational legalization of marijuana. And the other issue that I have with Gillibrand is, as the senator of the state of New York, which is one of the most progressive states, if not the most progressive state in the United States, when Jersey is already ahead legislatively on legalizing recreationally, when neighboring Massachusetts and further up the road, Maine, have full legalization, how come her as a senator hasn't at least tried to advocate for full-on recreational marijuana? She can't do much as a U.S. senator, but her influence saying she supports that, I think, would move some of the state legislator people around in the state of New York. So you also have to analyze, well, what could they have done? And I feel like with using the Senate as a bully pulpit, Gillibrand could have appealed to local power players in New York, and that has not been her focus. So to me, that was an issue. One thing that I found really interesting about Gillibrand was her answer to a college affordability. Now, of course, there's advocacy from Bernie Sanders and a lot of more people in the progressive wing to completely cancel college debt, to eliminate that, to create completely free college tuition. That might be, in my opinion, a little unrealistic. I don't know, I had to examine it. Gillibrand had kind of a happy medium between not addressing the student loan debts at all and completely having free college. And what she said is, let's talk about civic service, like an AmeriCorps program, like Teach for America, like community service, like the Peace Corps. And she said, okay, you do 1 year of that civil service, you get 2 free years of college. You do 2 years of that civil service, you get 4 years of college. So I thought that was really interesting. That was actually a very original point of view. I've never heard that compromise viewpoint on college debt before. I mean, this is a view that I think Gillibrand is very unique and brings this unique issue to the race that we should all recognize. Personally, in my analysis, I feel like it could be a slippery slope because there are people that once in a while want to reinstate the draft in the USA, and of course you have to legally register for the draft even though one doesn't exist. So is this that slippery slope where, okay, you do the civic service and then you're on this list and then there's a foreign entanglement, and do you even leapfrog over Congress to draft people now that you're already on this list? Now, that being said, I don't think Gillibrand is a reflexive foreign interventionist, and I don't see her doing that, and I think this comes from her heart, and her heart comes from the right place. So I think it's interesting. I think it's worth analyzing. You also have to wonder, well, the logistical sense, can the government house these people? Can the government, if you're doing Teach for America, is there enough space to house people in lodging? If you're going overseas to help out with hunger issues, for example, in Africa, which would be a great cause, is there enough to buy a plane ticket? So these logistics have to be worked out. But I think it's interesting, it's original. So my final analysis about Gillibrand is I'd like to give her a shot. You also have to factor in how effective of a communicator is Gillibrand. And of course, she's very attractive and she's a very good communicator. And when she's interviewed, she's very kind of low-key, very personable, doesn't seem unreasonable, doesn't seem high energy. But when she is on the stump, as I've witnessed at the University of New Hampshire, she's incredibly passionate. And she has that fire in her belly where I could see her giving a speech at the DNC in 2020 and just blowing everyone away. To me, that was what was one of the issues of Hillary Clinton. It wasn't the tangible qualities, whereas so much as it was the intangible qualities. And she couldn't get that fire where she could be that soaring orator, where she could kind of speak with urgency, speak with importance, speak with passion. Everything was kind of sort of professorial, kind of sort of flat and monotone. Gillibrand doesn't have that. And you have to analyze these people's styles because that's important too. How are they going to be in the debates? Are they going to inspire people like Obama did? That's important. So that's my analysis of Gillibrand. I have mixed emotions about her, but I'm willing to give her a shot. I think she is too much promoting herself as a member of the ultra-progressive wing when she isn't necessarily, and when she isn't even necessarily putting those policies in place as she runs in 2020. But again, she doesn't have those same issues that Harris might have had with some criminal justice issues. Certainly, Klobuchar has had a more moderate record in the Senate. Certainly, many people have. So she is good on the issues. She's just not great. And I don't see her trying to get great. That being said, it might make her a more appealing candidate in the general election.
Thank you for being here. I think I'm going to start with a little bit about myself, about how I got here, and then I'm going to tell you why I want to run and how I think I can win, and then the floor is yours. I got my start in politics when I was young, probably when I was about 10. And I was interested in politics because I had a grandmother who loved politics. She was born in upstate New York in a town called Albany, at the South End, very modest means, never got to go to college. She worked every day of her life. She became secretary at about age 20 in our state legislature. back then, 75 years ago, she recognized pretty quickly all the legislators were men and all the support staff were women. And she thought, well, and so my first political experience was going into a headquarters with a room full of ladies stuffing envelopes on a hot August day for their favorite candidate that they hoped to elect in November. I was amazed by these women. I thought, I just want to be just like them someday. Because they were so engaged, they were so committed to our democracy, to our country, to their community, and were willing to work for it. So I learned a couple life lessons early. I learned that women's voices do matter, that what you do with your time matters, that grassroots activism can make the difference. And I always thought, someday I want to serve. Someday I want to be part of this. I went off to college. I went to Dartmouth, so not too far from you guys. And I went off to law school. I went to law school because my mother was a trailblazer too. My mom was, unlike a lot of the moms of my friends, she worked outside the home. She was one of only 3 women in her law school class. And she recognized that it's okay to be different. It's okay to have a different path. It's okay to create a different future for yourself. As long as you believe in it, as long as you work hard, there's really nothing you couldn't accomplish. She taught me that, and so I've always had a certain fearlessness about me because she was fearless. After college and after law school, I started working in New York City, and I saw our First Lady go to China. Now, I was an Asian Studies major at Dartmouth. I learned Mandarin. I lived in dorms in Beijing. And so when Hillary Clinton went to China and gave that very powerful speech that human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights, I was blown away. And I thought, God, why wasn't I invited to that conference? And I recognized really fast that I was not invited because I wasn't involved in politics. I would have needed to be involved to have been invited. And so I thought to myself, politics is important to me as an adult. So I got off the sidelines. I started getting active in a local community in New York City about how to get involved in races. I joined a part of the DNC called the Women's Leadership Forum. And our job was to help candidates, teach women how to organize, how to support candidates, surrogacy, advocacy, all the things that help candidates win. And I met a bunch of ladies that have been doing it for 20, 30, 40 years. And I thought, God, I want to be just like them someday. And so I got more and more focused on how I could use my voice in politics. And I decided I really wanted to do public service. It was just that aha moment where I said, I really want to be serving others. I did not feel like the job I had at the time was rewarding me. I felt it was all about money, and it wasn't about doing what's right and helping people. And so I tried to get into public service. All decisions that you will have to make in your years ahead. So I first tried the obvious route for a lawyer back then was go be a prosecutor, go work at the U.S. Attorney's Office. A lot of my colleagues did that. I didn't get a job. And I thought, okay, fine, I'll go the charitable route. I applied to the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Corporation, the Rockefeller Foundation. I didn't get an interview. And then Hillary decides to run for Senate. And I thought, my big shot, this is it. We go work on a campaign. I'm going to do that. I had no relevant experience. And so I couldn't find my way. But I wound up going to an event where the speaker was Andrew Cuomo. He was then the Secretary of HUD. And he talked about why public service matters and why being a Democrat mattered. And by this point, I'd been trying to move into public service for over a year, and I was pretty frustrated. And so I kind of went up to him and said, well, Mr. Secretary, I think politics is an insider's game, and I can't get from A to B. Andrew, being very provocative, said, well, would you move to Washington? Now, if you're young and single in New York City, you are never moving to Washington, because that was not where you wanted to go. But I said, of course I'll move to Washington. Sure enough, I get called the next day, I go down for an interview, I get the job, and I give that big law firm 2 weeks' notice and leave. And I go straight to Washington. I'm a lawyer for housing and urban development. I was special counsel. And I jumped out of bed every day. I was so excited because I felt all that talent, everything that I've been given, every God-given talent, every bit of education, every bit of hard work was converging into one place to help people, to make a difference, to make their lives better. And I never, ever felt more engaged and more excited about what I was doing and why I was doing it. And so that was it for me. I just decided I want to do public service. I will find a way. And in fact, the only person who thought I could win was my mom. So, because she dared me to be different. And so off I go on this campaign. Good things happened. A lot of things came together, and I won the race by 6 points. I ran for re-election, and I won it by 24 points. And so when I became Senator of New York, one of my jobs was to make sure I could be a voice for the whole state. And I talked to folks all across my state about the issues they cared about. I recognized pretty early on that there was a couple issues I had wrong that I needed to actually get right on. One was immigration and one was guns. When I met families who lost children to gun violence, I knew instantly that I needed to protect everyone, that I needed to fight for them as if they were my own child. And that's what I did. And so I started working hard on ending gun violence, making sure we have a comprehensive immigration reform, making sure people have pathways to citizenship, making sure we look at immigration as our strength, because it is. This country was founded by immigrants. Our diversity is our strength. It always has been. This country's never been afraid of refugees. We've never been afraid of immigrants. In fact, in New York City Harbor, the Statue of Liberty stands, and she stands as a beacon of light and hope to the world, saying, send us your hungry, your tired. Send us your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. All the things that we've always believed as a nation, as a country founded by immigrants. And under this president, he has destroyed. This president wants to build walls. He wants to divide us. He wants to divide us on every racial line, every religious line, every socioeconomic line. And he wants to divide us because he wants people to fear their neighbor. We believed in the golden rule for a very long time. Love your neighbor. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Care about the least among us. And that's what I want to restore. I feel so called to fight against this, to actually do what it takes to restore what's right about this country, to fight for others, to fight for other people's kids as if they were my own. And if you really believe that, that means you're going to fight for health care as a right and not a privilege. That's why medical care for all is so important. That's why we want to eventually get to single payer. That's why. It's why you should fight for better public schools. Every kid, no matter what block they grow up on, should have access to a good public school, should have access to higher education, to advanced degrees, to any type of training that gets them where they need to go. But to do any of that, you need to fight against all that stands in the way, and it's greed, it's corruption, it's institutional racism, it's huge structures and impediments that is why the system's rigged. It's rigged very intentionally by the powerful to make sure they stay powerful, by ultra wealthy to make sure they continue to become and be ultra wealthy. It is literally rigged for a reason, because they don't want the status quo to change. And so if you want health care as a right and not a privilege, you're going to have to take on the insurance industry. You're going to have to take on a for-profit industry that is not aligned to your health and well-being. You might not get a second day at the hospital. You might not get the drug you need. You may not get the procedure that's necessary because they can't make money if you get it. If you want lower cost medicines, if your parents, your seniors that you know, your grandparents need cheaper costs, you got to take on the drug industry who are unwilling to let Medicare patients buy in bulk at the cheapest price. If you want to take on gun violence, you've got to go straight up to the NRA. They are mostly funded by the gun manufacturers. Those manufacturers care more about selling a weapon to a teenager in Walmart than the safety of a community, the safety of a school. They care more about selling a bump stock or an assault rifle than they care about keeping our community safe. They care more about making sure there's no universal background checks than someone gravely mentally ill with a violent background being able to access a weapon anytime they want. That's just the truth. So if you're not willing to take on the power structures that actually make all the things we care about impossible, you won't get there. That's why I'm banning corporate PAC money. That's why I'm banning federal lobbyist money. That's why I don't believe individuals should have super PACs. Because if you get the money out of politics, you can begin to restore our democracy, to have a direct democracy. One person, one vote, where your voice is as important as the Koch brothers. Wouldn't that be nice? That's what needs to happen in our country. And it's a moment where all of us have to feel that it's our responsibility to do that. Someone else is not going to do this for you. You have to do it yourself. We have to do it ourselves. We have to stop throwing things at the TV and actually start organizing. Because if we just decry the hate and decry the division and speak out against President Trump, but not do something to restore what's been lost, we won't ever see that vision for America. We will never see a child that can get access to a good education, universal pre-K, affordable daycare, better public colleges, better public schools. You won't see it. It won't happen. You still have to pay too much money for college. The student debt crisis will continue to grow because there's a lot of special interests that want you to pay as much as possible. They're happy to balance the budget on your backs. The federal government should have all federal student loans refinanced immediately at 4%, the going rate of the Fed window. That would make a huge difference immediately. $15 billion would go back into the economy overnight if we just refinance. And I'll tell you why. I think we have to take institutional racism head on. And we have institutional racism in lots of places. Criminal justice, which I'll address directly, but also healthcare, also education, also jobs in the economy. on criminal justice. You have to decriminalize marijuana because if you are a young black man or a young brown man, you are 10 times in my state, 10 times in parts of my state, 10 times more likely to be arrested than a white young man, despite the same usage of marijuana. That one moment, being part of and being pulled up by the criminal justice system, could change your life forever. If you have a conviction, first of all, you might be put in jail overnight, maybe for several days. You might lose your job over that. If you are a person who has children at home and you're a single mom or a single dad, you might be putting your children's lives at risk. The inability for us to recognize the institutional racist approach of the criminal justice system just means that you're going to hold back generations, communities, for a long time. So you have to take it head on. Same thing with cash bail. There's a lot of Americans who don't have more than $500 in savings. And so one bail payment could be more than you have. If you can't make bail, you're going to be in jail until your next court appearance. That could be weeks. It could be months. Like, it's not an insignificant thing that happens to you. We have to get rid of the cash bail system because it so disproportionately affects people who don't have money and communities of color. And so it's just the truth. We have to get rid of it. We also have to recognize the fact that because we do not enforce the laws fairly, that many people will have challenges that are hard to overcome, and I'll give one example. I met a young man who was a professional working for a major Fortune 500 company who it was a restaurant chain, and he was traveling abroad for his boss. But because he had a marijuana conviction from when he was younger, he got detained leaving the United States. He was detained for a year. I mean, a year. Imagine a year taken out of your life because of institutional racism in our criminal justice system. Imagine that happening to you. And the way I would build it is this. I would like to say to America's youth, if you are willing to do a year of public service, you get 2 years of free college, whether it's a community college or a state school. If you're willing to do 2 years of public service, you get 4 years. And the reason why I like this as a idea is because I think it's so important to teach the country what it feels like to serve others first. If you create a heart of service in young people, they will never forget it. They will know how amazing it is to use all your time and all your talents to help someone else first, to put someone else ahead of yourself. It is something that will change you forever. I think it'll do a couple of things. First of all, it'll move a lot of people into service industries that desperately need more workers and more young people interested. So I think we need comprehensive immigration reform because there's at least 3 reasons why immigration is important. 1, we love families. We want families to be together. We want to reunify families. We want families to be able to thrive. 2, immigration has always created economic opportunity and growth. When we've taken refugee populations, you've seen it in New Hampshire, we've also seen it in New York. In small upstate towns, when immigrant populations come in, particularly refugee populations, they help the town to grow. They actually are entrepreneurs. They like to innovate. They like to start businesses, and it works. It's actually very good for the economy. And third, there's a humanity that's missing from what President Trump's doing. When he separates a child from a parent at the border, it is immoral. It is not a national security issue. Immigration is not a national security issue. What is a national security issue is anti-terrorism and anti-trafficking of humans and anti-drug trafficking, anti-weapons trafficking, and terrorism. Those are national security issues, not immigration. And so I think what President Trump has created is harmful to us. He's making people afraid of their neighbors. He's making people afraid of immigrants and afraid of children and families that need us. It doesn't have to be that way. So we can have comprehensive immigration reform, but we can also have more humane treatment of people seeking asylum who need our help. We've never been afraid of that, ever, and we shouldn't be.
Across the entire state, which is a lot for a state with only about 1.3 million people. And most of the people I know, I've known people who've had their families torn apart. They've seen their sons, their moms, their aunts and uncles die because they've developed an addiction to these drugs. And most of the people who I've known who have been affected by the opioid crisis didn't start directly with heroin or fentanyl. They started with prescription painkillers. So my question is, as president, what would you do to combat the big pharmaceutical companies and the doctors that are issuing these prescriptions very loosely to people who may not need them, and just helping to perpetuate this crisis that's not only a New Hampshire problem, but in West Virginia and a lot of impoverished southern states, and mainly affecting lower income communities?
So the first thing you need to do is to go after the greed, because there are pharmaceutical companies that are spewing out opioids because they know it makes them money. I mean, we just learned a couple days ago that there were internal documents at Purdue Pharmaceuticals that basically said, let's make sure that we have higher dose opioids but so we know people will be more addicted. It's unbelievable, the crassness and the lack of empathy that this producer had towards people who would die from overdoses, and who did it solely so they could have more money. $4 billion earned by the family who produced the opioids. That pharmaceutical company was complicit in spewing opioids into state after state, community after community. One community in West Virginia, I think it was, there was enough for every adult in the entire community to have an entire bottle of opioids just for themselves. And there's a lot of impediments and a lot of challenges that we have to create oversight and accountability. I have a bill to actually take on the drug companies that will do things for profit motives but not for human health. Get rid of the price gouging. Get rid of the long, prescription time. So John McCain, before he passed, and I had a bill to say, let's limit an opioid prescription to 7 days. Because if you have a wisdom tooth out, or you break a wrist or pull a muscle, if your doctor gives you a 30, 60, or 90-day supply of a drug that you might only need for a day or two, what do you think happens to those drugs? They might sit in that medicine cabinet. The grandson might come in and take it. He might take it himself and get addicted. He might bring it to a party. He might put it on the table, let everybody have one. It will be taken by someone who maybe that prescription is not written for. Or the person does take the medicine as written for, and they become addicted on the prescription their doctor just gave them, and have a lifetime addiction that they have to overcome. So the truth is, we need far more transparency and accountability throughout the entire medical industry to make sure we're only prescribing the right amount. We have to worry about doctor shopping. We have a program in New York that's really effective, where there's a database, so every prescription for an opioid is logged into that database. So every pharmacy can log into that database and say, oh wow, this prescription's been filled 5 times already. This is a problem. We also have the ability to track Medicare and Medicaid, and we can track pharmacies. If we find a pharmacy where all the prescriptions seem to be filled at, or if we have a doctor who seems to write all the prescriptions for opioids, we can then investigate that for fraud and corruption. But it's all about greed. Be very clear. Every time any person in this cycle who is worried more about their profit than the human health and well-being of our communities, it is greed. The love of money is at the root of all evil, I promise you. That is the source. That is why I'm banning the corporate PAC money, why I don't believe we should have individual super PACs, and why I don't want that our lobbyists' money, because their voice in our government is too strong. It is too outsized. It is disproportionate. We need Americans, workers, people like yourselves to have a greater voice. You should be as powerful, if not more powerful, than a Koch brother. Period. Like, that's it. So you gotta take